And we continue our coverage of the post-election cloud of things that continue to go on even as we speak with our good friend Jeff Weaver. Jeff's been on the show before. He is the author of the book How Bernie Won. I got that right, didn't I?
Exactly.
He was the campaign manager for the Bernie 2016 presidential campaign, where I was the writer, so obviously we know one another. He is a senior advisor to Bernie Sanders, and he is the owner of Victory Comics in Falls Church, Virginia, which I believe meets all your comic and gaming needs. Is that correct?
Certainly does, and if it doesn't, we'll get what you need.
All right, okay.
Yeah,
so having established that, first of all, how's Bernie doing?
Bernie's doing great. Look, he was very active at the end, particularly at the end of the last cycle. We did a 9-day, 8-state tour across the country. It was very successful. The crowds were, incredibly energized out there. There's just a tremendous amount of grassroots enthusiasm for progressive politics, and obviously to, beat back the president's agenda.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, and I think that's one of the big takeaways from the election. But what I've been seeing, Jeff, in the post-election commentary is a lot of positioning and jockeying.
Yes.
So, for example, one of the things I read about for Bernie's success rate, for example, and this was before, we've seen some possibilities, at least as of our recording on Thursday afternoon, of even more. But we've seen, for example, Katie Porter in California's 45th Congressional District. She may pull it off.
Yep.
She is very much in the, for lack of a better term, the Bernie wing of the Democratic Party. I saw one of the commentators write that Bernie's hit rate for candidates that he supported, his success rate this year was something like 65 or 68%. But then they went on to say, but he went to reliably Democratic districts.
Right,
so they were kind of trying to take from that.
Reliably Democratic. You can ask Hillary Clinton about how reliably Democratic Wisconsin, Michigan, and some of these other states are, right?
Well, that's a good point. And the other point is, you don't see these kinds of qualifiers applied when the DCCC or somebody else is bragging about their hit rate. So I guess my question to you is, what's your takeaway? Since there is so much, one of the takeaways is, this proves that centrist Democrats are making a comeback. This is one of the, and I have, believe me, many thoughts about that. But first of all, your thoughts about that.
Well, let me say two things about it. I think if you look across the country, first of all, in terms of ballot initiatives, you saw the minimum wage being increased by referendum in Missouri and Arkansas. You saw in Colorado they beat back a fossil fuel energy sponsored amendment that would have taken away the ability to do zoning and other kinds of regulations. So all across the country, when you look at ballot initiatives, you saw people taking very progressive stances. And those are just a couple of examples. Medicaid expansion in 3 red states passed, right? So people want progressive solutions to problems. So that seems pretty clear. Now, the question of candidates, look, we were in a post-primary environment. And in the primaries, some progressives won, some more centrist candidates won. Bernie was out campaigning for candidates. I mean, he campaigned with Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan for governor, a candidate that he had, endorsed against in the primary. But you saw that people recognized the sort of benefit that Bernie brought in terms of energizing the progressive base, in terms of energizing young people. And those candidates in this, if you look at the Senate, he was out campaigning with Jackie Rosen, who was certainly, I wouldn't classify as a progressive, more centrist kind of Democrat. He had 2 events with her. We had a great day with her. But if you look at people like Claire McCaskill and Joe Donnelly, who expressly went after the progressive base and the progressive agenda in a negative way, those candidates went down the hardest. And if you look at, John Tester won in Montana, more of a centrist kind of guy, but Bernie had endorsed him. Bernie had contributed to him. He did not attack the progressive base. So I think one of the lessons we came out of this is, even if you're a centrist, if you want to go after the progressive base, and by that I mean negatively go after the progressive base, you're going to pay a real price at the ballot box. And you saw, look at Andrew Gillum in Florida, extraordinary candidate, right? Won the primary shortly after Bernie endorsed him in a come from behind a win. Came closer to winning in Florida than any of the last 5 quote unquote centrist Democrats in that state. So the country is changing. And there's another aspect of this, Richard, because I've seen this stuff from Third Way and these other
of course.
folks who, They're incredible spinners of statistics and not really honest about them. But the center of gravity in the Democratic Party has really moved. And when people like Third Way and others talk about the quote-unquote centrists who won, if you look at them, there were a number of them who supported Medicare for all, centrists. Right. There were folks who supported expanding Social Security, not saving Social Security, expanding it. Is that a centrist? $15 minimum wage, almost everybody's for that. Is that a centrist position? So, what we're calling centrists now in the party are far to the left of what we would have called a centrist in the Clinton administration, for instance.
I think those are excellent points, and I agree with them. For example, Medicare for all. When we started out with the Bernie campaign in 2015, April 2015, it was not even on the radar politically. It was considered a ludicrous thing to be for. Now, the sort of centrist comeback is particularly among pundits, but even some politicians as well. Well, they say they're for Medicare for all, but they don't really mean it. Well, the fact is, if you say you're for Medicare for all, whatever that may mean in the interior of your own mind as a candidate, you are advocating a very different program in 2018 than you were advocating in 2016.
100%, and that's on that's on issue after issue. Governor Cuomo in New York, who's again not a progressive, moderate, or even conservative Democrat by today's standard, has had implemented a program of free tuition at some public universities there. It's many people say it's too narrow and what have you, and I think those criticisms are probably right on. But the truth of the matter is you had somebody who does not put himself in the progressive camp, who is at least feels like he has to move forward, and this is the power of the grassroots is having on the party, right? And so again, the center of gravity in the party is moving. And when you hear these sort of people posturing, as you put it, really what they're trying to do is convince everybody that somehow we have to go back to the sort of Clinton days. And I draw a distinction. There are people in the party who I describe as moderate or centrist, who really, because their style is incremental, right? They may be more ideologically progressive, but they're stylistically they're incrementalists, right? And so, those people I would consider sort of moderate or centrist. But then there's another group which is very different, which is really what Third Way and these other groups represent, which is a very corporate orientation. And that's what we have to be careful of. And they want to glom on to these other folks who are more incremental in the pace of policy that they'd like to implement, even though they would not in the end mind getting to where you and I would want to get. And they're trying to glom onto those people and say, oh, those people are just like us. Well, that's not really true. Those people in the Democratic Party who have a fundamentally pro-corporate orientation are really almost extinct.
It's a great distinction that you just made. And again, we're talking with Jeff Weaver, senior advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders. It's really important to make that distinction, I think. For example, right now I'm co-authoring a book on Medicare for all, and including the politics, the economics, financing, some of the other issues. And, one of the things that keeps coming up is you do have people, I debated an economist, a liberal Democratic economist, who said at one point, well, I'm an incrementalist. That's just who I am. And I think for a lot of people, that's partially training. It's partially the way they've done business for 20 or 30 years in the Democratic Party establishment. But if they could, just again, using Medicare for all as an example, if they could, they'd have Medicare for all. They just have a theory of change that tells them the way you have to do it is step by step by step. Now, I would say the experience of the last 10 years suggests we need a new theory of change. And I would say that one of the things that Bernie has brought into the debate is, no, if you want something, articulate it, express it, and lay it out as the goal. But I do think you're right that we have to distinguish between the people who really don't want that agenda that the rest of us want, and those who just have a different strategy for going about it.
No, that's right. And I'll give you one example. We traveled to Bernie did this 8-state 9-day tour across the country, and I went with him, and we met. We had big rallies for candidates, but we also met with grasstops leaders and other, folks along the way. We ran into a guy in one state. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but I ran into a guy, and he's part of the Democracy Alliance, which, as you know, is the sort of Democratic donor organization, the big dollar donor organization. And he said, look, Bernie, I've got to tell you that maybe I'm just speaking for the donor class, he said, that we've always had this theory in our group that the only way you'll get change in this country is by taking small incremental steps. And he said, after 2016, I have to say that we were absolutely 100% wrong. So there is this growing realization, and I think, the truth of the matter is that Trump has really illustrated this with a very radical, extreme agenda about which he has not been shy at all, right? He's not an incrementalist.
Right.
He's quite the opposite. And, I think you've also seen it on the left. Black Lives Matter was certainly an organization which I think talked about the danger of incremental change and how we had to move boldly in a certain direction. So I think there's a growing realization in politics that this sort of incremental baby steps is not the way to go. It doesn't excite people, and we have big problems in this country, Richard, and they're fundamental, they're systemic, and incremental steps are not going to cure them.
No, I absolutely agree with that. And I think that it's interesting that incrementalism for some people under the Democratic umbrella, and I'm not being hostile, just observational, has become almost an ideology, that they're very attached to it when it's just a tactic. And if that tactic doesn't work, and it clearly hasn't worked, then let's try a different tactic. And I agree with you that the big vision ideas are what work. Republicans, I used to have on my laptop a little thing like those old World War II in motivational posters.
Right.
But what it said was, Trump has a vision for America. Do you?
Right.
Because that's what I think this has come down to, is that these guys, these Republicans, and it's not just Trump, want to fundamentally remake this country and are in the process of trying to remake and succeeding in some cases in remaking this country in a nastier, more brutal, a savage image than what we've known for the last century. And I think the question is, what is the competing vision that we stand for, right?
No, that's exactly right. And I think, I don't spend my time, frankly, beating up on Hillary Clinton or her campaign last time, because I know many of those people and like them, frankly. But the truth of the matter is that he articulated a vision. It's a very dangerous vision, a very destructive vision for the country. But there was not really a counter vision, a counter narrative to explain why people were hurting in this country. And, this affected, and, Priorities USA, the pro-Clinton super PAC, has done research on, what happened in 2016. They did, and they looked at two groups. One was young people of color who just didn't turn out because they didn't really view the Democratic Party as a vehicle for change, right? And then you had, sort of white working class people in a number of places on the quote unquote blue wall who flipped from Obama to Trump. And, and that I think is because, people are hurting, whether it's working class people of all races, frankly, or whether it's young people are hurting, and they want to hear somebody articulate why that is. And I don't think Hillary Clinton did that. I don't think, certainly the third way people don't even think there's a problem to begin with. They're in a totally delusional camp. But there are many people in the Democratic Party who are not willing to sort of name names and talk about why people are hurting this country. And Trump, he was wrong, but he did do that, right?
No, absolutely. And I guess the question now is, how do we turn this into a process of change that actually works for people? How do we win? And we had some victories in 2018, and by we, I mean people with this vision, as well as more broadly the Democratic Party, because I think even at its worst, the Democratic Party is persuadable. And I think that's what we're beginning to, I think that's what the 2016 campaign showed. So we had this, not always, obviously, and obviously the third way types never will be and all that. So we have that up against us. But how do we turn this, how would we articulate, well, it's 2018. If we win in 2020 and going forward, this is what the world's going to look like in 2028.
Right. Well, look, I think if you come from our, my perspective, and I assume your perspective as well, by 2028 you would have a universal, probably single-payer healthcare system in this country. You would have a reinvigorated labor movement in this country. You would have substantial criminal justice reform in this country, certainly way beyond what Trump is currently talking about. We'd have a sane immigration policy in this country, and really a rebalancing of power in America, so that, the wealth and income and political power was not all very concentrated at the top of the country, right? There will always be competing interests, right? The wealthy corporate barons will always be vying against people for power and money and what have you. But the playing field now is just so lopsided. It's not even it's not even a fight in some cases, never mind a fair fight. And we have got to reorient the playing field so that there can be a contest of ideas and interests in this country that is reasonably fair.
And one of the things I heard, and it was actually said as a barbed comment, but it was wrong. One of the things I said was, I heard somebody say was, I think it was after the Women's March, well, let's face it, if Bernie had been elected, we'd have to do this anyway. But what struck me about that comment was that it was intended as a kind of jab against Bernie and the people who support them, but Bernie always said that. His theory of change always has been, it's not just about who's president or even who controls the House of Representatives. If you're going to get this kind of fundamental change, you're going to have to get 1 million people. So wasn't that the exact phrasing he used?
Out on the
get
mall.
1 million people out on the mall. So I remember correctly. And so the fact is, isn't that a part of that theory for the next 10 years too? That elections aren't the be-all and end-all of change. There are way stations in the process of change where the people have got to be mobilized every step of the way.
No, that's right. And look, in many ways, the most dangerous aspect of Trump is the extent to which he is dividing up people who should be standing together for their common interest. I'm just in a meeting today with a guy, and he said, black broke and white broke, it's still broke, right? And to the extent to which Trump is really trying to rip apart solidarity between working people of all races, people of different religions, men and women, gay people and straight people, native-born and immigrant people. That's the real sort of fundamental structural damage he's doing to this country. Convincing white working class people that somehow impoverished immigrants or African Americans are their enemies and the reasons why they're hurting. What that does is it creates a barrier between the ability of working people of all races to come together in order to fight for their common interests. And that's, in many ways, he's really ripping at the soul of our democracy.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And I think it's also correct that the interests of working people are the same, regardless of whether they're white, black, brown, male, female, young, old. So, whenever people start talking in Democratic circles about how do we attract the white working class, my answer is always, and unfortunately we're going to have to leave it here, but my answer is always attract the working class.
Right, exactly. And articulate the real reason why working people of all races in this country are hurting.
Well said. Well, we'll have to leave it there, unfortunately, but Jeff Weaver, senior advisor to Bernie Sanders, author of the book How Bernie Won, and proprietor and owner of Victory Comics in Falls Church, thanks so much as always for coming on the program.
Always a pleasure, Richard.